that there was indeed a beginning in time. It's called the Big Bang. We don't know what happened before that because Einstein's theory of gravity breaks down at that point in time. We definitely know that the universe was not created in 6 days. I can tell you that. The Earth is not the center of the universe. You know that the Vatican thought that's the case, but then Copernicus and Galileo demonstrated based on evidence that no, we just are players in this cosmic play, and we just arrived at the end of the play. And so if we want to figure out what really happened, we should look for other actors and ask them if they know more. Maybe they have been around for much longer than we did. We always somehow manage to evolve to something better. We have a great potential as human beings. We have an amazing future ahead of us.
Avi Loeb, welcome on Just Tap In. What are you most excited about right now globally and in your life?
Well, I am most excited about the opportunity to meet a partner from another star. Just like any other dating experience, the thrill is from being surprised. And I'm trying to do my best to go to dating sites with potentially extraterrestrial messengers. We haven't done that before. We were just waiting for a phone call at home, and nobody was calling us. So what do you do when you feel lonely and nobody is calling you? Is leave your home and check what's happening nearby.
I know you've said you've grown up on a farm, and since you were born, you were very curious about the world that you were going into. And from a young age, you were asking these huge, big questions about philosophy about the stars. I'm curious now, what is one question about the universe that still keeps you up at night?
What happened before the Big Bang? Because the Old Testament, the Bible, has a version of the story that the people believed in for thousands of years, where there was a beginning in time, and then the world was created in 6 days. The modern version, based on science, all the data that we have, is that there was indeed a beginning in time. It's called the Big Bang. If you go back in time, the universe is expanding, so by going back in time, you end up at a point where the density of matter and radiation was infinite. And that's called the Big Bang. And we don't know what happened before that because Einstein's theory of gravity breaks down at that point in time. We definitely know that the universe was not created in 6 days. I can tell you that. Because if God was resting on the 7th day, we would see evidence for that in the brightness fluctuations of the cosmic microwave background, the relic from the Big Bang. We don't see anything unusual 7 days after the Big Bang. But the data implies that it took 13.8 billion years to make everything we see around us. And that includes making a galaxy like the Milky Way, which is our home galaxy, inside of which a star like the Sun formed. And there are hundreds of billions of stars like the Sun within the Milky Way galaxy. And next to the Sun, there was some debris left, out of which the Earth was made, starting with a collection of dust particles that came together, built bigger objects that eventually collided and made and stuck together to make the Earth. On the surface of the Earth, we find liquid water. That was a great fortune because life as we know it required chemistry in liquid water. And so we came to exist only over the past few million years, which is 1 part in 1,000 of this cosmic history. we find ourselves arriving at the stage at the end of the cosmic play. We know that we are not at the center of the stage. The Earth is not the center of the universe. That the Vatican thought that that's the case, but then Copernicus and Galileo demonstrated based on evidence that no, the sun is at the center of the solar system and it's not at the center of the universe. So we are not at the center of the universe. And therefore, we just are players in this play, cosmic play, and we just arrived at the end of the play. And so if we want to figure out what really happened, we should look for other actors and ask them if they know more. Maybe they have been around for much longer than we did. It's all out of a sense of humility. We shouldn't feel that it's about us. We keep thinking that it's all about us, that even if there are aliens, they will come and visit us because they are interested in something that we do. And my point is probably not. We are not significant in any way. They don't care about us. If they will arrive to Earth, it will be because they had some other objective when they left on their journey billions of years ago, before we existed. And most stars formed billions of years before the sun. So things like us probably existed billions of years ago. And we should accept that. Why should it be about us? The biggest message that the universe sends us is that we are not that important.
There's an Oscar Wilde quote that you like to repeat, which is, "We are all in the gutters, but some of us are looking at the stars." I'm curious to know what factors are those that keep people in the gutters and not looking outside, not looking at the stars, and what really influenced you to start looking and be like, what else is out there?
Well, it's clear that most of the real estate is out there, that we were born on this rock that is left over from the formation of the sun, and we are preoccupied with what happens on the surface of this rock, and we fight. There are lots of political conflicts over territories. Just now you have two wars, one in Ukraine, the other one in the Middle East, and it's all about territories. And if you think about the big picture, it makes very little sense for us to invest $2.4 trillion every year in military budgets worldwide. And of course, that was a point that many people understood. And, John Lennon wrote the song, "Imagine all the people living in peace." But I don't believe that that hippies will rule the world. I don't think politics will in any way change because it's part of our nature to get into conflicts and look down. And this is unfortunate. We look down on people, we look down on Earth, we don't look up. My hope is that the situation will change once we realize that we have a better role model than our politicians. And that is in the form of a neighbor, a smarter kid on our cosmic block that we should imitate. If we realize that there is another civilization on an exoplanet that is doing much better than we are, in the sense that they arrived at our doorstep before we arrive at their doorstep, we will have a role model. They may use technologies that represent our future. That will inspire us to go into space. So I think that's what we are missing. We are missing a visitor from another world that would tell us that we can do better. And that's my hope, that once we figure out that we have a neighbor, we would realize that all of us, all humans, are in the same boat here on Earth, and we should work together and learn from our neighbor. And if we cooperate, we can do miracles. We can do lots of things. We are wasting a lot of time, energy, effort, money, just on conflicts. And I calculated that if we were to use the military expenses for space exploration, we could send a CubeSat towards every star in the Milky Way galaxy, hundreds of billions of them, within this century. And we're not doing that. Instead, we are fighting each other, and nothing really comes out of that.
How did you make that calculation?
Oh, it's if you take $2.4 trillion and just multiply it by the years left, let's say 75 years in this century, and you calculate the cost of a CubeSat, then you figure out that you could, in principle, send hundreds of billions of them if, with economy to scale, because the cost of CubeSats will go down once you have a large enough number of them. So it's a simple calculation. It's just a question of priorities. Everything in life is a question of priorities. And that's why I prefer to be an optimist, because sometimes life is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we invest time, money in search for relics of extraterrestrial civilizations, then we might find them. For example, if we look around at our backyard, we might find a tennis ball that was thrown by a neighbor, or some empty trash bags. And my point is that we did find anomalous objects over the past decade that do not look like the rocks that we are familiar with in the solar system. And the response of the quote-unquote experts on comets, asteroids, meteors, is that whenever you see an object that looks unusual around Earth, you call it an empty trash bag object. I just found last month that there is a whole catalog of empty trash bag objects. And these are objects that are moving relative to Earth, not just in response to gravity, but there is something else pushing them. And the suggestion is maybe it's sunlight that is pushing them. And if there are empty trash bags, they have a large surface for their mass, large area, and therefore they are getting pushed around. But nobody tries to model them, because the experts would argue, oh, they're just empty trash bag objects and they are broken pieces of satellites probably. So people ignore them. And then when the first interstellar object was identified, Oumuamua, back in 2017, it exhibited an additional force acting on it in addition to gravity, and it wasn't clear what that force is because there was no evidence for evaporation. So it couldn't have been the rocket effect. There was no gas coming out of it, like in the case of a comet. So in that case, nobody said it's radiation pressure except for me. And people said, no, it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before. In fact, most recently, the experts are arguing it's a dark comet. And by that, what they mean is that this object has a cometary tail around it, but it's invisible. And I feel like the kid who was saying the emperor has no clothes, and the experts are behaving like the adults in the room, telling me, oh, no, there are clothes, they're just invisible, and you need to accept that. So what I find is as inappropriate is this double standard. In the case of objects near Earth that behave in an anomalous way, the experts would say, these are empty trash bag objects, we don't need to think about them. They don't model them. And then with respect to Oumuamua, they don't allow for radiation pressure. They say, no, that is ridiculous. We should not allow that to be a technological object. And let's imagine that it has some invisible tail and call it a dark comet. And my point is that calling something a dark comet is an oxymoron, because a comet is identified by its tail. It's just like calling a koala a monkey without a tail. I mean, a koala is not a monkey. It's a different animal. And so when experts call Oumuamua a dark comet, they're basically putting a prejudice, and they're feeling relaxed. Once you call it a comet, then we know what it is, but it's unjustified to do that.
It's almost like we want to define things in the way that we've known them in the past. And when something completely unknown presents itself, then we want to call it what we would normally call it. And I've learned that the unknown are when it comes to terms of the unknown and matters of the unknown, our imagination tries to step in and fill in the blanks based on what we've experienced in the
Yes.
past, but also
That's completely fine. But in science, you should allow a broad conversation. That's all I'm saying. You can advocate for whatever you believe in, but be open-minded to
I love
alternatives.
that. And when you talk about extraterrestrial life and aliens, I'm sure that in your mind, you've come up with imaginations of what that may look like. Have you ever thought about if we were to make that contact, if we were to come across a extraterrestrial advanced technology, what types of things do you think are out there in the universe? You know, we know what we know in our physics, but what else you think could be out there? What have you imagined would that look like?
Well, first of all, our imagination is limited by our experiences here on Earth. And when you deal with a date with someone that has a completely different DNA that comes from another star, all bets are off because it could be very different than what we are used to. It could be life as we don't know it. And also, we just had 100 years of modern science and technology. Quantum mechanics was discovered just 100 years ago. And the atomic scale chips that are currently being manufactured for AI, artificial intelligence, state of the art computers, these chips are designed based on our understanding of quantum mechanics from 100 years ago. But just imagine if we had 1,000,000 years of science and technology or 1 billion years, it would be impossible for us to imagine what it would look like. I'm just thinking about the biblical story concerning Moses that was convinced that there is a superhuman entity by seeing a burning bush that was never consumed. And if you were to show Moses a simple cell phone that we use today, he would have been even more amazed than a burning bush. And he would have believed in a superhuman entity. He called that entity God. But we know that to produce these cell phones that we have, you just need a higher level of technology. We are still humans, the same the same species as Moses was. It's just that we are at a higher level of understanding the physical reality through science and technology. So my point is that having a higher level of science and technology can appear miraculous to people who don't have it. And, a very advanced level of science could be a good approximation to what we call God. Because let me give you another example. Suppose we, at some point in the future, develop a theory of quantum gravity, meaning we will unify quantum mechanics and gravity, two of the pillars of modern physics, which are not yet united in a theory that can make predictions. But if we had that, we would be able perhaps to figure out what happened before the Big Bang, because that's what Einstein's theory of gravity is missing. It's missing quantum mechanics. And once we put it together, we should be able to figure out, to go back in time and figure out what happened before the Big Bang. And it would be just like having a recipe for a cake where you have the ingredients and you know how to put them one after the other. And then you need an oven to provide the appropriate heat, and you will get the initial conditions that would lead to a baby universe like the one that we are in. So that is the job description of God, if you think about it. If you are able to figure out how to make a baby universe, even if you don't have the oven, you are at the level of what the traditional religious texts assign to God. And so what I'm saying is, there is a way of unifying science and religion by simply making science far more advanced. And it's possible that when we meet another civilization, they would be so far ahead of us because of 1,000,000 years or 1 billion years of science that we would not fully understand what they're doing, and the technologies they use would appear as miracles to us. And the encounter could give us a sense of what our technological future might be. So it could be very inspiring. As far as I'm concerned, I prefer not to imagine because I just want to remain open-minded, and all I'm looking for through the Galileo project that I'm leading is for something that doesn't look familiar, something that is not from this earth.
One of my favorite movies of all time is Interstellar, and you know, your one of your books is of the same title, and they talk a lot about black holes in that movie. And I know you served as the founding director of Harvard's Black Hole Initiative. What are we yet to understand really about what a black hole is?
We don't know what is at the center of a black hole. So again, it's the same problem with Einstein's theory of gravity. If you imagine a star collapsing to make a black hole, the question is, where does the matter go? And as you follow the matter, it gets concentrated. As it collapses, it gets concentrated all the way to a point, and the density becomes infinite. And again, we are faced with a singularity, a region of space, in this case, where Einstein's theory breaks down because of the infinite density of matter. And if we had a quantum theory of gravity, we could have, in principle, figured out what happens inside a black hole. My conjecture, that has no basis because we don't have such a theory, is that perhaps you end up making an object at the center of a black hole with the maximum density possible. It's called the Planck density. And so everything that falls into a black hole keeps accumulating around this object. But the only way to find out if that's the case is experimentally to enter into a black hole. And I actually offered that possibility to colleagues of mine who work on quantum gravity. And I said, why don't we take a trip and you can enter into the black hole and check if your theories are correct? And they said, Avi, you have an ulterior motive of sending us into a black hole.
Would you do it? Would you go inside of a black hole?
Actually, if I knew that my end is near, that if I had, let's say, one day left for my life because I had some terminal disease or something, then I would definitely go into a black hole because it's an experience that is unique. And as a physicist, I know what to expect, but I would like to see it. Maybe I would be surprised as to what's inside.
Because in Interstellar, they go through one and end up in another universe, basically.
Yeah, that's science fiction, and it's the imagination of the creators of that movie. I mean, the image of the black hole was calculated correctly from the outside, but they had a lot of speculations entering as to what happens when you get inside or close to the event horizon.
There's a law that you talk about called the chronology conjecture that forbids time travel. I'm really curious to understand, and I think a lot of people as well, as to why haven't we been able to crack time travel yet?
Yeah, so this conjecture was written about by Stephen Hawking, and it's completely arbitrary. He just thought that it would make sense to put this conjecture to protect chronology, to protect history. Because, if we had a time machine and we can go back in time, you could get into some logical inconsistencies where you meet your grandparents and you prevent them from making your parents, or you do something that would not allow you to come into existence, and that's a logical inconsistency. And some people suggested that may not be possible, but the simplest way out is to say there is no time machine. And that's what Hawking postulated. Now, you can show that if we had a substance that induces negative gravity, in other words, it was similar to, if you put it in a bottle, to a negative mass that is producing repulsive gravity rather than attractive gravity, then you could build a time machine. We don't know of such a substance. I mean, the only thing we know about is the universe is expanding and the expansion speed is accelerating over time. So there is an effect of repulsive gravity as a result of the vacuum. That's an effect that was forecasted by Albert Einstein when he came up with his theory of gravity in 1915. But that is the vacuum, which is uniform throughout space, and there is no way to bottle it, to concentrate into a negative. We can't really shape the substance that makes the vacuum. It's called dark energy in the context of the universe. But if we had the ability to engineer or play with dark energy and make a negative mass, then we could have constructed a time machine that you can show. The first thing I would do if I had access to a time machine is go back in time to the just before the Second World War, and I would kill Adolf Hitler just so that he would not trigger the death of 65 members of my father's family, and the rest of the 6 million Jews that were killed in the Holocaust. The fact that no Jew came back in time to prevent Adolf Hitler from initiating the Holocaust implies that no Jew had access to a time machine, probably. So that we can say, based on the existence of history, the way it is, I think it's very likely that there is no such substance that you can make a time machine out of. I mean, the other thing you can do with this substance is create a wormhole, which is a bridge between two regions of space that allows you to travel between those regions faster than light. And again, this is an idea that Albert Einstein worked on with Nathan Rosen about 80 years ago. But then after that, people realized that this Einstein-Rosen bridge is unstable, that in fact, it pinches off before you have a chance to go through it, even if you move at the speed of light. And the only way to stabilize such a wormhole is to use a substance like that has a negative mass or induces a repulsive gravity. And unfortunately, we don't know if such substance can be used, and therefore wormholes may not exist.
Do you think the next step for a civilization in terms of their technology would be to harness dark energy and dark matter to create these technologies? Hello, beautiful family. Quick one today. I just wanted to take a moment to thank each and every one of you that have subscribed to this channel. Your subscription means more than you know. Even though it's free, what you're doing is you're empowering a whole channel to be able to do this every single day and continue showing up in the way that we can with all of our resources on hand. Thank you for contributing to the growth of this channel, for sharing it with the people that you love, for creating a conscious movement of individuals that are seeking the sovereignty and the divinity of their soul. This is why we're here. And if you haven't already and you're enjoying this content, I invite you now to look below on that little button that says subscribe and welcome you properly to this community. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being who you are and being pure love and radiating that with everyone that you see. Back to the episode.
Yeah, so it's remarkable that people like me are getting paid, because when we study the universe, we don't know what most of the universe is made of. 85% of the matter in the universe is of a substance whose nature we don't know. We just know that it exists because we see the effects, its gravitational effects on visible matter. So the visible matter is a minority in the mass budget of the universe, and we see it moving around and responding to some other substance called dark matter that we don't understand. And then on top of that, you have the vacuum energy density that I mentioned before, which is called dark energy. So In our conversation, I mentioned three things already that are called dark. One is dark comets, another is dark matter, and the third is dark energy. And you might think that by calling names to things you don't understand, you have some sort of understanding of what they are, but it's a complete illusion, because Richard Feynman, the well-known physicist, he said 60 years ago that he doesn't care about calling names to things, because calling names does not imply that you understand them. And when you call something dark matter, it basically means that you have a prejudice, that you think that there is a substance that induces gravity the way you know it. But in reality, it could be that there is no substance, that it's a ghost. It's something that you imagine. And in fact, gravity is modified on cosmic scales, that gravity behaves differently. And you think that there is additional matter, but there is none. And so by calling it dark matter, you're actually introducing a bias into the way you think about the problem. And the same about dark comets, as I mentioned before. By saying that they are comets, you are already assuming that they evaporate and you just can't see the cometary tail. But in fact, if they are spacecraft, they don't evaporate. They can be pushed by reflecting sunlight. They could do some other things if they have an engine. So it's really misleading, and many scientists prefer to call things with a name that implies as if they know what they are talking about, but in fact they have no clue whatsoever. They pretend to be, once again, the adults in the room, and they ask for funding to find out what these things are. And we've been searching for 50 years for the nature of dark matter. We still don't know what it is. We invested billions of dollars in that search. I'm just advocating investing billions of dollars in the understanding of dark comets. Why not? If any of them happens to be technological in origin and from another star, we should figure it out. And why should we assume that there are mundane comets evaporating without us being able to see the cometary tail? I mean, some suggested maybe dark comets or Oumuamua, this object, is a hydrogen iceberg. And we've never seen a hydrogen iceberg, especially not at the size of 100 meters. We don't know if they're made in nature. But somehow the quote-unquote experts prefer to say, oh, it's an object of a type that is not so extraordinary. Let's imagine that first. And that's not a valid approach necessarily, because you have to imagine everything and then get as much data as possible. If you imagine something mundane that is not exciting, that is not important, then you would say, okay, this problem is solved, let's move on. And you will not invest a lot of money in trying to figure out what it is. And therefore, I'm driven by curiosity, and I think we should keep our imagination alive before we figure out what these things are.
And Avi, what other things that we think we know about reality have you found are truly just illusions as well?
Yeah, so for example, we tend to believe that we have free will, that we can decide whatever we want, and also that we have something called consciousness. But in my view, these are just phenomena that result from the fact that our brain is very complex and unpredictable. So given the large number of synapses in the human brain, it's just impossible to forecast how the human brain will respond to various types of inputs. It's such a complex system. And moreover, the environment that we respond to is not documented. And as a result of that, you end up with people doing things that you don't expect. And they can feel as if they have, it's sort of arbitrary for them to choose. But the way I think of it is that you're just dealing with a very complex machine. And if you, even in the context of dynamics of bodies, using Newton's law of gravity, for two bodies, you have an analytic solution. You can solve the problem easily. If you add a third body, you start to get chaos. You start to get situations that are completely unpredictable, because if you change a little bit the initial conditions, you end up with very different histories of the system. And that's just three bodies. Imagine having billions or trillions of components in your system. Obviously, you will not be able to forecast what it does, especially if it interacts with an environment that is also very complex. Now, we can actually test that, because artificial intelligence, AI systems, will get as complex as the human brain in the coming decade, I think. Maybe they're almost there now. Once we have a sufficiently complex AI system, we would see that it features the same phenomena as what we call free will or consciousness when we interact with other people. Actually, consciousness we only understand in the context of ourselves, but we tend to assign that to other people. And my point is that AI systems will appear as complex as the human brain, and then show us all the phenomena that we find when we interact with people. And that will demonstrate that my point of view, that it's just a matter of having a very complex system as to why you can't really forecast what it does.
Is the universe conscious?
Yeah, I mean, the universe is a very complex system. Now, it didn't start complex. I mean, the initial conditions of the universe can be summarized on a single sheet of paper. The universe was nearly uniform, with the same conditions everywhere. And as time went on, regions that were slightly denser than average started collapsing because of gravity. And then you started making objects like the Milky Way galaxy, inside of which stars fragmented out as a result of gravity, and so forth. And so the complexity that we see today in the universe, that, even here on Earth, you need millions of books to describe what is happening in 1 year. It's just very complex. And all of that was enabled by gravity that made the objects that we see in the universe. In the early universe, shortly after the Big Bang, there was nothing. It was a mix of elementary particles, just a soup of particles, very hot and dense soup, but with no complexity whatsoever. And then hundreds of millions of years after the Big Bang, that's when the first stars, the first galaxies formed and complexity emerged. And of course, as a very complex system, you may assign some sense of consciousness to the universe as well, and we are all part of the universe. And, people often worry about what will happen as a result of climate change on Earth. Are we on the path to a catastrophe? And they just need to look back in time, and they will see that Earth went through global catastrophes that were much bigger than the one that we envision. And somehow the Earth survived, and all kinds of life forms blossomed in it even after catastrophes. So it's possible that humans, our civilization will perish. We will trigger a catastrophe, and we will be completely worried about that, and try to prevent it, but not able to prevent it, and eventually we will all die. All humans will die. But I'm not worried about Earth, maintaining its longevity. And, eventually the sun will get very bright, and will dry out all the oceans on Earth. So Earth will become a desert, and eventually the sun will engulf the Earth, because it will expand, become a red giant. And so the Earth will end up at the center of whatever is left from the sun. And so everything that we cherish, that we think is extremely important, will not be there. And, it just gives you a sense of modesty that, we should be grateful that we live at this point in time in cosmic history, and we have a chance to do something and enjoy the view, but it's not about us. We will not be here in the distant future, and let's just enjoy it while it lasts.
One of the biggest questions I think that we could ask ourselves is, what happens when we die? Is there any explanation from physics that can really lead us to a greater understanding of what happens to these physical bodies after their expiration date?
Yeah, so the way I think of that is, imagine an AI system again, and imagine unplugging it from the wall. It stops operating. Now, instead of unplugging the system from the wall, in our case, it's the fact that our body loses its ability to function after some time. But I think the sense is quite similar. I haven't experienced it yet, but it will probably feel like suddenly things get dark and you lose it. And that's it. And I don't think there is anything beyond that. And then the body deteriorates after that without life in it. And that's pretty much it. So, the fact that we die is a very serious matter. We keep ignoring it most of our life, although it's always in our consciousness. So, for example, we want to leave a mark, and you can do that by having kids, for example, that live longer than you are, and so they will carry your DNA. That's one way of extending yourself beyond your death. Another one is to act in ways that will be remembered by other people in the future, to do something that will be remembered. But all of that, if humanity will perish at some time, some future time, it will not count to anything. Nobody will keep a record of what happened here, just for the same reason that other civilizations that existed on other exoplanets, near other stars, if they died, we never heard of them. If their planet ended up at the center of the remnant of the star, we would never know that. The universe is probably full of graveyards of other civilizations that predated us. Just like the Earth had 117 billion people on it, right now there are only 8 billion that are alive. Most people that ever lived throughout human history are dead. But we didn't know them, most of them. Just think about it. So many, 117 billion, we've never met them. And the same will be true for everything we do here on Earth. It will not be remembered by anyone. But we have to accept that. That's part of our existence. Now, there is a remote possibility that AI will help medicine and make humans live longer than we used to in the past. And so some people are hopeful that within the coming decades, the lifespan of humans could be extended indefinitely. So then you will have people that can live forever unless they are run down by a car on the street or something. The question is, would you like to live forever? I mean, I would be happy to. I think we will have to change the structure of society. I mean, for example, tenure in academia will not make much sense because, if you have these old faculty and they live for thousands of years, there will be no job for young scholars. That makes no sense. And also the other thing is, if new people are born and old people do not die, there is a limited space here on Earth. We will have to move people to space. That's a major adjustment.
I know you've spoken out about your thoughts on Elon Musk wanting to go to Mars. How do you see that mission that he's trying to accomplish?
Well, I think it's definitely inspiring and a vision for the future. But I would argue, first of all, Mars is not a great place to go to because it has no atmosphere. You cannot survive on the surface of Mars for more than a few years because of the bombardment by cosmic rays, and also because the temperature on the surface of Mars changes by hundreds of degrees between day and night. It's not a good place to live on. However, you can go underground, you can go into caves, just like humans started in caves to protect themselves from the weather. If we go to Mars, we'll have to live in caves. But it's just a rock. It's just another rock. So we were born on this rock. Now we will go to another rock. I don't see much benefit from that. In fact, it may well be that life on Earth came from Mars, because Mars is a smaller body that cooled earlier before Earth and allowed probably liquid water and the chemistry of life before Earth did. And then there were rocks that were exchanged between the two planets, and it's possible that life started on Mars and was delivered inside the rock to Earth. And if that in that case we are all Martians, and the ambitions of Elon Musk is to go back to our home, our childhood home, and the first tiny astronauts were actually microbes that came from Mars to Earth billions of years ago. I don't see that as a necessarily a good move forward. I think it's much better to have a space platform that we design such that it will give us all the conditions that make humans happy. So that requires thinking in terms of how to introduce some effective gravity in that platform. It's sort of like a space station, but a much more advanced space station. And if you think about it, 50 years ago, our brand of humanity, I mean, humans left Africa 50,000 years ago, and by now we live in high rises in cities. The transition from high rises to space is less dramatic than the transition from the jungles of Africa to a high rise. So I'm hopeful that in the next 50,000 years, we will definitely be able to establish communities in space on platforms that allow them to thrive. I don't see a big advantage in settling on another rock.
What would be those essentials that you would want to have inside of these space platforms? I would want to have a pool, a beach in there. I don't know, but
that's easy to arrange. The main challenge is to have some effective gravity acting on your body, because there are all kinds of medical problems that astronauts face at microgravity, at small, having no gravity whatsoever, including in their vision. And it's not solved. And so you need to introduce some artificial gravity. One way is to do that is by rotating the spaceship. But there are engineering challenges, and we need to think about them and invest money in developing such a thing. And I think it sort of resembles Noah's Ark in the biblical story, where Noah tried to save animals from the great flood, and he built an ark. And here we are trying to save humans from some future catastrophe on Earth by building a spaceship. So the motivation would be similar to the story of Noah, except the details of how the ark is made would be very different. I should say that actually there was a Japanese spacecraft that was made of wood. And the reason they did that is because at re-entry, it will burn up and leave no... I mean, they were trying to be environmentally friendly, so they made it, they designed it out of wood.
A little while ago, we talked about, surviving in a way our imminent death of the physical bodies. And one of those ways was, doing something that would leave a mark. If you look back on your life, in a few years, how would you like to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered as the person advocating that we might have a smarter kid on our block, and I very much hope that I'm right, that we can get inspired by that entity out there in near another star, and that in fact, this would be the biggest discovery and the biggest event in the history of humans, to realize that they are not unique and special, that there is something else similar to them that is intelligent beyond the Earth. And if I manage to push humanity in that direction, it would be amazing. I really am hopeful. I think it's romantic to imagine that we are not alone. It's really depressing to imagine that we are alone. And I hope to be remembered as the person advocating for that and being correct.
You are doing that. And there's a recent Medium article that you wrote called Betrayal of Scientific Objectivity by the News Media. And, in this way, this is a modern type of media. We're getting this information out to the world. But do you think that there is, a distortion of scientific findings to fit an agenda? And are we, unknowingly trapped in this, soup of information that isn't clearly all the truth?
Definitely. I mean, that was evident from the discussions about the possibility that COVID-19 came from a lab in Wuhan. At the time when it was first suggested, it was ridiculed within academia. Papers could not have been written. People who suggested that were canceled. It was really a serious matter. But 5 years later, it's now accepted to be a very viable possibility by the Department of Defense, by the intelligence agencies, by it's something that is suspected to have been the actual reason. And that's based on information that was gathered. And then you ask yourself, why weren't people, I'm not saying the information was available to all these people that ridiculed the idea, but why weren't they open-minded to allow for that? Why did they have to cancel or push back those who suggested it at the time? Why was it popular to basically dismiss it and not even allow a discussion on this subject within academia, within the scientific culture or publications and so forth? And this is just an illustration that, that there is toxicity within academia that is unjustified, and it hurts innovation, it hurts the progress, because if we are ridiculing ideas that are not conforming to what we wish to believe, the wishful thinking that we develop, then we will arrive at the truth later, if at all. Obviously, that was the experience of Galileo Galilei with the Vatican. And only 350 years after he died, the Vatican admitted, oh yeah, Galileo was right. They did that in 1992, 2 decades after humans reached the moon. And we would never be able to send rockets to Mars if we thought that Mars orbits around the Earth, the way that the Vatican advocated. And so it's really dangerous to have a culture in which there is resistance to innovation, to ideas that are out of the box, because it just slows down the progress. People often say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but what they really mean is that I don't believe that this idea, and therefore we should not seek the evidence. So when they are not seeking the evidence, they will never realize that they are wrong. And there was the example also of continental drift, where Hess was suggesting it, and based on the fact that you can look at the continents and perhaps match the way that they look, and like a jigsaw puzzle. And for 40 years he was ridiculed, and he died, and then evidence started coming that he was actually right. That if you look at the part of Africa that faces South America, you get the same vegetation, that you get very similar rocks that match, implying that it was all part of a big continent. If you go back hundreds of millions of years, you wouldn't need to use an airplane to go from the US to Europe or to Asia, you could have driven your car because it was one big continent. So this idea, as much as it sounded ridiculous to experts in the field, and they ridiculed the person who thought about it first, it ended up being right. And the same was true about meteors, rocks falling from the sky. Before 1803, it was thought to be a ridiculous idea. We see rocks on Earth, why should they fall from the sky? And then in 1803, there was a meteor shower in Liège, France, and a lot of people witnessed 3,000 rocks, and some of them they touched and they were warm from the fireball. And so the consensus shifted, and then right now the experts believe, yes, rocks can fall from the sky, and now they insist that it can only be rocks. We're not allowed to talk about other objects that may have been technological in origin from far away, because that's an extraordinary claim. And you find this pattern over and over again, and it's really disappointing because we don't learn, and the tenure in academia was invented to allow scholars to deviate from the beaten path without worrying about their job security. That's the whole purpose. Nevertheless, what you find is that most senior members of academia are pursuing honors, awards. I call that regression to the mean. They're trying to dance to the tunes of selection committees that award prizes, that give grants, and they regress to whatever the popular view is, even if it's not justified. In theoretical physics, the popular view is that of string theory, and we have no evidence whatsoever for extra dimensions. We don't even have evidence for supersymmetry. The Large Hadron Collider did not find it in the natural range of parameters. And string theory was based on this premise of supersymmetry and extra dimensions. So you have people accepting the notion of string theory for 50 years, working on it as part of the mainstream. Young people are, if they want to get a job in theoretical physics, they very often enter into string theory. And it has no substantiation. And, just 50 years ago, Richard Feynman said that it doesn't matter how smart you are or how senior you are. If you have an idea that doesn't agree with experiment, you are wrong. And, that is the foundation of physics and science. You need experimental verification because you might be pursuing the wrong ideas. And nowadays, it looks like for 50 years, the mainstream of theoretical physics that Feynman was a leader of just 50 years ago is not listening to Feynman. They don't care about experimental verification. They will continue to do this thing forever. In fact, it's better not to have experimental data because then they are not proven wrong. And it's a completely different mindset. And by the way, it reminds me that, I had a lunch with a person who works on string theory, and I asked him, what was your most important scientific paper? And he said, it was about supersymmetry. And I said, well, but it was not detected. And he said, oh no, but maybe the next experiment will find it. It may be around the corner. And it reminded me of what the religious Orthodox community of Crown Heights in Brooklyn said. They had a theory that their rabbi will become the Messiah. And then there was a data point. He died, and he didn't come back as the Messiah. And so what did they say? They said, well, we just have to wait. He might come in the future. And so when I think about this, is there any difference between a religious belief that something will happen in the future, even though it didn't happen according to what you expected as of yet, and the belief that supersymmetry will show up in a future experiment, even though it was ruled out in the natural range of parameters by the Large Hadron Collider? I think it's just human nature, but the whole point about physics, the whole premise of physics, is being able to test your ideas. And yet, practitioners are not seeking that.
Are there any groundbreaking discoveries, such as the ones of, what we've been talking about, the evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, that you have seen deliberately diluted, ignored by mainstream media to maybe control public perception in that case?
Yeah, so obviously there was the well-known case of potentially finding evidence for microbes on Mars. And, uh, there was a press conference by NASA that reported that they might have found it with President Clinton being there, and then they realized that no, the evidence was not conclusive. But the principal investigator of that sample from Mars was still convinced that they had some evidence that there might have been life in the sample that they looked at. Now, the strange thing is that NASA went to Mars again, and most recently, in recent years, and they've never tried this experiment again. And you would ask yourself, why? Why wouldn't they, on a subject that was not settled, why wouldn't they repeat that experiment or do something even better? Just put a drop of water and check what happens to the soil, the Martian soil, whether there is any evidence for life in it. Why wouldn't they send a microscope that will look into the soil? They didn't do that with the latest experiments that were sent to Mars. Why? Because they wanted to avoid as much as possible any controversy. And this is my complaint, that if you are not taking risks, if you're not willing to explore the unknown and sometimes be wrong, then you will not discover anything.
I know that science can really open the mind, but also really open the heart. So I'm curious, has there ever been a moment in your life where science has brought you to tears?
Yeah, when I interacted with artists that were inspired by my science. So just a month ago, there was a sculptor from New York City, Greg Wyatt, who is regarded as America's Rodin. So he is very accomplished. He made the sculptures in New York City, in Washington, the Arlington Cemetery. He really made many famous bronze sculptures, and he decided to donate to my office at Harvard a bronze sculpture of Galileo Galilei in honor of the Galileo Project that I'm leading. And we had a special event where he came and spoke about how he does his work. And we also had a musical piece by the artist in residence at the Center for Astrophysics, where I am. And it was very moving to me to see an artist that is so accomplished being so generous with me and giving me a sculpture that actually was very emotional. I interact with other artists, with a filmmaker. The Netflix is supposed to have a documentary within a year about my work, the expedition that I went to. And there is a poet that keeps sending me poems inspired by my research. He lives in New Zealand, and I know of a songwriter that wrote a song about my work, and there is also a playwright that wrote a play about my research. And all of these gestures by people who are coming at it from an artistic point of view is making me very inspired. I see that as something that didn't need to exist. They came out of the blue, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm actually supposed to meet with a group of artists and celebrities and CEOs in about a month and a half, and some of the most famous names in the world. And they asked me to speak about my work, about the Galileo Project. And I felt very honored, and I look forward to
Who are you most excited to meet?
Well, I asked my wife if it's okay if I have breakfast with Margot Robbie. And she said, And she said, no problem, I trust you.
Oh my God, that's good. That's good. It's so beautiful how science is so closely related to art. Science inspiring art, art inspiring science, left brain inspiring the right brain. Um, yeah, I just wanted to leave that comment in because as you were explaining there, like they're very closely related. And I'm just excited to see what comes out of that. The more we discover new things, what new art will be discovered as well through that process. It's like the brain is evolving.
Right. Yeah, so exactly. So when you seek new knowledge, when you look into the unknown, it's an opportunity to grow because you might learn something that you never imagined. And that is true if you do science, it's also true if you do art, but it's not true if you all you are doing is reproducing what is already known. And that's what most people do. Most scientists and most people who are not professionals, they just keep digesting. It's like chewing gum. You have the gum already, you just chew it, and nothing new comes out of that.
It's a good metaphor. When was the last time you felt wonder and awe?
Oh, that was when we went on the expedition to the Pacific Ocean, found this material at the bottom of the ocean that we think includes some molten droplets from the first recognized interstellar meteor. We analyzed them in the laboratory, found them to have a composition different than solar system materials. And, to me, it was an amazing feeling to, find material that was a mile deep under the surface of the Pacific Ocean that perhaps came from outside the solar system. That is an amazing thing. And these molten droplets were less than a millimeter in size. They were less than the size of a grain of sand. And my daughter asked me if I can put some of these on a necklace for her to wear, but because they look so beautiful. But I said there is no way. They include a
The
lot of
first
iron and
interstellar
they're
necklace
tiny.
available on eBay. You'll probably sell it for millions.
Well, I actually need these millions to go on the next expedition. We plan to use a robot and put it on the ocean floor to look for bigger pieces. And I don't have those millions that would allow me to go on the next expedition. So maybe it's an interesting business opportunity.
Just
What you
get
just
Margot Robbie to
suggested.
promote it and you're good.
I'll think about it.
What would you say to encourage a young person to go into this research field?
Oh, what I tell young people is uh, don't pretend to be the adult in the room. Maintain your childhood curiosity. And in fact, I got funded to build more observatories for the Galileo Project. One of them will be in Indiana as part of a STEM education campus. And I see that as an important mission to educate young adults, high school students, to collect data, analyze it without prejudice, be curious. Because the beauty of being a scientist is you don't need to know the answer in advance. You can just engage in collecting the data, and you should not have a prejudice. You should not limit yourself. You might discover something completely new, as long as you don't assume in advance what you will find. And that's the thrill of doing science and physics. And I hope to convey that. I told the people who are constructing this STEM education campus that I would like to be personally involved in developing the education part of the students, how they interact with the telescopes and how they do their research so they learn how science is done.
You talk a lot about long shots and that some of the biggest long shots have with it the biggest risk. If there was one long shot that you would be willing to dedicate the rest of your life to, even if it posed the biggest risk, what would it be?
It would be to go fishing on a moon of Saturn called
Ooh.
Titan. because that's the only body in the solar system aside from Earth that has liquids flowing on its surface. It has oceans, rivers, lakes made of methane and ethane at a temperature that is 1/3 than the temperature on the surface of Earth relative to absolute zero. It's 94 degrees Kelvin on the surface of Titan. But methane and ethane are in liquid form there. And I would like to throw a hook into that and see if I catch any fish. Of course, I will not eat the fish because it would represent life as we don't know it. And it could be a health hazard. But it would be amazing if we happen to find life in a different liquid than water, as we find here on Earth.
I love that. And Avi, we end every show with a segment called the final trio, which are just little questions that we ask at the end. Before that, where would you send people to connect with you, with your work, with all the amazing projects that you're heading right now? Where would you send people if they're interested to go even deeper with you?
People can follow up on updates on medium.com, Avi Loeb at medium.com, and you can subscribe for free and get the updates every couple of days about exciting new results on the universe at large. And I have so far 55,000 followers there, but I would be delighted if there were more.
And that's the only social platform that you have. There's no Instagram, there's no Twitter or X.
No, I don't care how many likes I have on social media. I don't subscribe to social media at all. I guess in retrospect, that was a good decision. I mean, it wasn't clear a decade ago because everyone was on social media.
And also there's an upcoming conference called Contact in the Desert, which I will be there as well as part of the interview team. And you're going to be there, but virtually you're going to be giving a talk there. So encouraging people to come join us. That will be in Coachella Valley on May 29th to April 2nd. So I'm excited to see everyone there if they feel called to come and say hello to your beautiful faces. And for the final trio, the first question that I had for you is the biggest question that remains yet is, what are we not being told about the universe?
Yes, and I think it's the fact that the cosmic story is not about us, and there are other intelligent beings out there that are more capable than we are. And, for some people it's a disappointment, but for me it's an inspiration because we can learn from them.
Beautiful.
And, I met with a group called Christianity Today, and they were worried about the conflict with religion. And I tried to explain to them that I have 2 daughters. And when the second one was born, it didn't take away from my love to the first one. So to believe that God can only attend to one group of intelligent beings is very limiting. I mean, a parent can attend to many kids and be very loving to all of them.
You're hitting us with these metaphors today, Avi. I love it. Imagine you could send one message into the universe, a message that would be received by an intelligent civilization millions of light years away. What would you say to them?
What happened before the Big Bang? When did you, how old is your scientific and technological culture? What are you most proud of in terms of your accomplishments? These are the kinds of questions that will give me a sense of what they can teach me.
And what are you most proud of about humanity and what we've created in the last century with our science and our technology?
Well, the fact that we always somehow manage to evolve to something better. I mean, the world today is better than it was when I was born. I lived through half of the history of modern physics. And I think we have a great potential as human beings. The only issue is that there are some bad actors that prevent progress at a rate that could be much faster. And as long as we don't give them the attention that they are seeking, and we work together, I think we will have a fantastic future. And I'm not worried about AI. I think it will just be useful for humanity to grow. I mean, of course, we need to make sure that bad actors do not use it in a bad way. Like any other tool, it's a double-edged sword. But if we are keeping, if we will keep it at bay in terms of using it and making sure that it's being used for the good and not the bad tendencies of humans, then we have an amazing future ahead of us.
Beautiful. And finally, Avi Loeb, I just wanted to acknowledge you for your brilliant mind, for all the contributions that you're doing for humanity. I know you're definitely going to be leaving a huge legacy for the current generations and for the generations to come. And it's an honor to be able to support you in this way. I can't wait to talk again when we have more understandings about the universe and keep the conversation going. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.